Darwin said it's not the strongest, nor the most intelligent of species that survives, but it's the one that's most adaptable to change.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast, and today's guest is Mr. Herman Rutgers, who is the co-founder and current ambassador of EuropeActive. He's also an international ambassador for Reed Exhibitions, consulting to support the global growth of FIBO, and he has held influential top-level positions in a who's who of the fitness industry. For 2 decades, his own company, Global Growth Partners, has consulted and provided support from corporate strategy to marketing and sales. If you're in the fitness industry, this is an episode you do not want to miss. Please enjoy this interview with Mr. Herman Rutgers for the Escape Your Limits podcast. Well, Herman Rutgers, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this week's podcast. Where are you today, Herman?
Well, I'm at home close to The Hague in the Netherlands. As I said, the Netherlands is a very small country. It's close to Amsterdam. It's close to anywhere. But I'm locked here now for the last 6 weeks. I was on vacation in France when Monsieur Macron on TV announced that France would go in a lockdown. And the next day, the ski lifts were shut down, the restaurants were shut down, everything was closed. So we drove home. It's about a 10-hour drive to get home from my place in France. And since then, I have not been traveling. I've been once to an office in Amsterdam, but for the rest of the time, I've been here. And luckily, our Prime Minister calls it an intelligent lockdown, which means that we can go out of the house, we can go jogging, we can go bike riding. But other than that, supermarkets are open, some other stores are open, but it's really a very weird life that we lead right now. But it's not as severe as the people in Madrid or in Paris, where you really have to stay home unless you have an urgent thing to do. But it's okay. I mean, and the weather has been fantastic. We've had Holland is not famous for having sun and blue skies, but it's been the first 5 weeks of COVID lockdown have been pretty much amazing in terms of having great weather. And I have a garden, so I can go out in the garden as well to enjoy working in the garden and doing a little bit of work there as well, and a little bit of exercise.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I've heard that as well in England. They're saying they've got these perfectly blue skies. I'm not sure whether that's because the pollution is clearing and the weather's the sun's shining for a change. I'm not sure.
I think it has something to do with it. Also, there's no airplanes. You know, I think we're sort of in the runway of Schiphol Airport. KLM has got 95% of their planes are sitting on the tarmac. So there's very few planes coming over as well. So, and if you look at these maps, they have these wonderful maps of China and all parts of the world where they show, let's say, January photographs from satellites, and then they show pictures from that right now. Definitely pollution has gone down tremendously. And let's say the sky is a much clearer place as a result of this. All these factories having been shut down, and less car traffic and less traffic in general, and less pollution as a result, and CO2 emissions.
Fantastic. Well, look, Herman, for those of you that haven't met or heard of you before, give us a little bit of a background on yourself and what role you've been playing in the industry in the last few years.
Okay, after a number of years in other industries, ranging from food to writing instruments, and then I turned my hobby into my work, which was with Prince tennis rackets. So I became the European director for Prince. Did that for 9 years, ended up as VP of International for Prince. And then Augie Nieto hired me into Live Fitness as the European director to begin with. And that was in 1994. So that's, what is that, about 25 years ago. I ended up in the fitness industry, and I really enjoy that. You know, there were a lot of similarities with the tennis industry. I joined the tennis industry at a peak, and I left it in time when the tennis industry went a little bit down. I will not leave the industry of fitness because it's not going down. It may be down a little bit right now, but we're not at all in a downward trend as then the racket industry was. So I started with Live Fitness in Europe. Then I ended up having the responsibility also for Asia Pacific, Latin America, and then moved to Chicago. That happened in 1998 to be part of the management team in Chicago with a bunch of wonderful people there. And in 2001, my wife said one day to me, well, Herman, I think it's about time to go back to Europe. Her father has gotten ill. And we went back to Europe. I then resigned from Live Fitness and started my own company called Global Growth Partners. And through that company, I've been doing some consulting in and outside of the fitness industry since that time. So, and after having left Live Fitness, I was approached by John McCarthy. I was the European director for EuropeActive on a part-time basis. I joined the board of SATS in Scandinavia, wonderful fitness chain, the leading chain in the Nordics. I became a co-investor in Stockholm in a concept called Activate, which is a senior fitness concept that is doing very well today, but I'm no longer involved with that. And then in, let's say, 2007, Harm Tegelaars approached me and said, hey, we need to have a European Association for Fitness. Why don't you join me and help me set that up? And the rest is history. We set up an office in Brussels, hired some people there. I was the part-time executive director, and we've really built a European representative body at the political level, organized some events in Europe. I left as an executive director about 7 years ago. Somebody took over that position. I ended up as a board member, and just 2 weeks ago, I stepped down as board member after having served 2 terms. And now I'm the official ambassador for EuropeActive. So I'm not gone at all from EuropeActive. And at the same time, I'm a board member in Basic Fit since the stock market listing, which is now 4 years ago. So I'm enjoying myself with that and doing some other things with Deloitte, doing the annual market report for the fitness industry and a few other things on the side. So I'm not bored at all, but most of what I do is indeed associated with the fitness industry. Do some writing together with Jan Middelkamp for the book we do every year for the European Health and Fitness Forum with FIBO. Oh, and I forgot to say that. Of course, I'm also the FIBO International Ambassador, helping FIBO to grow on a global basis. Started 5 years ago with FIBO China, set that up in Shanghai, and 2 years ago we started in the US with FIBO US, first in Orlando and last year in Miami, and that will take place again this year in November in Miami. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff in this great industry. I really enjoy it.
So you're keeping yourself very busy then, Herman.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have it another way, really. I'm a busy bee, my wife my wife doesn't mind, she likes me to be busy, so I don't harass her too much. Yeah, well, I'm in the house too much right now, but hopefully sooner rather than later that will change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what, in terms of the European fitness industry and as it relates to what your role in EuropeActive, how would you describe the current feeling and state of the market? Just as we're sort of in the middle of this COVID situation. How would you sort of summarize what the general feeling is within the industry at the moment?
Well, let me first comment then on 2019, because we just presented this 2 weeks ago, which we would have done at the European Health and Fitness Forum the day before FIBO opens, where we have the Congress, where always Carsten Hollasch presents the headlines of the report that EuropeActive does with Deloitte. And that was a very positive report. 2019 was a very good year. There was good growth in the industry, both in terms of number of members, in terms of revenues, strong development across the board. And also, and I know these numbers, also the January numbers were very good, the February numbers were very good. And then, of course, in March, the middle of March, most European clubs were shut down, almost everywhere at government request because of the COVID crisis. What is the situation right now? I think it is very difficult for everybody. Luckily, in Europe, other than many other parts of the world, governments have stepped in with trillions and trillions of euros to support industry. So in most countries, fitness operators are getting subsidy on their labor costs. In some countries, even up to 100% of the salaries of the staff. In some countries, 50% of the staff. It varies from country to country. But let's say the governments have stepped in and have sort of guaranteed for March, April, and May salaries of the staff. So most of the operators on the continent have not furloughed people. People are working from home. People are taking further education while they're sitting at home. So it's really not a bad situation. Depends, of course, how long this will go on and whether governments will continue. If this prolongs for longer than 3 months, whether governments will continue to make these kind of subsidies for labor costs. Of course, all club owners are talking to landlords to get rebates on the rent while the clubs are closed, getting some delays in payment from other suppliers. So there's a lot of, let's say, crisis management going on at the moment. So the situation is very uncertain. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, I would say. Yesterday, it was announced that in Czech Republic, the clubs are allowed to reopen. Funnily enough, the country that has been the exception in Europe is Sweden, where the clubs have not been closed due to government request. And there, the clubs are open, be it with restrictions in terms of number of people that are allowed to go in the club and capacity. So it's really, but the rest of Europe is really shut down, and no clubs are open. Everybody's preparing for reopening. Everybody's writing protocols. Governments have asked to the various sectors in the industry to submit proposals for under what conditions do they think they can reopen in a safe way, safeguarding the 1.5 meter physical. People talk about social distancing. I hate that word. It's about physical distancing. And they talk about, of course, washing your hands. In some countries, they're proposing, like they do in China, to take temperature checks at the door. But again, there is nothing locked in concrete yet. I know that EuropeActive is putting together a sort of a template protocol together for the industry, upon which, when that's finished, they will submit that to the UK government. The Dutch Federation has done something like that. But it's all work in progress. And other than Czech Republic, there is no country yet in the EU that has said, yes, fitness clubs can be opened again under these and these conditions. One thing I'm sure of is that when the clubs can be reopened again, it will be with constraints, particularly in phase one, and it will not be easy. And I think the industry, and I've read about the discussion in the US, where Equinox and Harvey Spivak, the CEO of Equinox, has said on the weekend that he's not going to open in Georgia, even though in Georgia the governor has said that the clubs can be opened, but he wants to take a laid-back position in the sense that he says, I want to wait and see how things are going before I'm going to reopen my clubs.
Now, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah,
you know, what are your thoughts about that? I suppose, you know, it makes sense. It's a difficult one to gauge because there's certainly, and we spoke about it off camera, there's a real split view in terms of what this situation means. You know, people are in two real opposing camps, and I guess if you know, on one side, it's like, well, let's get things back and running because financially we need to do that. But then on the other side, if the members actually look at it as almost frown upon it as like, you know, why are you doing that? You know, it could end up backfiring. So how do you sort of get that balance right between the pressure, the financial or economic pressures, and then the being aware and cognizant of the feeling of the members that you serve? That's between a rock and a hard place kind of question.
I think the industry needs to be careful. And I can understand that Harvey Spivak saying that, of course, it depends how financially strong are you? How much cash do you have in the bank to keep on paying your wages? And he also said, I'm continuing to pay my staff. You know, there's nobody who's been laid off or is being damaged by this situation. As an industry, we need to be careful to open too soon, but we shouldn't also to open too late. And right now, in some countries, retail is opening again. IKEA opened again today in the Netherlands. So we should look very carefully at the other retail sectors that are opening, how they do it, and with what kind of constraints are they doing it. Secondly, of course, we are in a controlled environment. So we can say we open the club at people can only come in the club when they book a time, like you book a class in before we had COVID. Now you book a time to go just to the gym, to do your exercise, not in the class, but on the machines on your own time. So that those kind of requirements. There is, of course, people wearing masks. It's one of the things that is being talked about. There will be sanitizing gels. There will be. I'm personally not convinced that taking temperatures at the door is the right thing to do, as they've done in China. I think in Europe we probably are a little bit more. Let's leave the responsibility with the customer. When they have fever and when they have certain symptoms that they know they're sick, they shouldn't come to the gym to begin with. And that's a responsibility for the individual, not so much for the club owner. But your question is a very difficult one. You know, we've been into this for 6 weeks. Yeah, nobody is expecting that the clubs will open soon, meaning in the next couple of weeks. You know, personally, I think maybe, and depending on the country, of course, Italy is much further in the cycle of COVID-19 as, let's say, Holland is or the UK is. The UK was the last country really to have a lockdown, and Italy was the first. And the Deutsche Bank report that I talked about earlier really gives a nice visual of the number of days that there's no more people being taken into intensive care. Because I think the whole reason why this lockdown happened was to protect the healthcare system. You know, in Spain, people were laying outside of the hospitals because there was not enough intensive care beds. You don't want that to happen. And I think the good news is that now we see the plateauing of the number of cases that are happening in most European countries. I think also in the US, even in New York, you now see that the peak has been reached and there is a decline happening. We need to watch very carefully, but I think the industry needs to listen to the experts. We cannot do anything until the government and the authorities who are controlling this situation are telling us that it's okay to open and under what conditions. The worst that can happen is that we open too soon and we have some things happening that we don't want to have happen. So I think that the safety of our staff and the safety of our members should be the number one criterion for when to open again. So I don't know whether that's a long-winded answer to your question, and I don't have really an answer. My wisdom would tell me to be cautious and rather to open a week too late than a week too early. That would be my bottom line.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, and I don't know any of the numbers in terms of the health of a lot of these businesses, but my guess is in most cases, unless you're one of the big players and are particularly well funded, that the majority of businesses is, unless they're getting support, which I hear not all of them are, it's pretty difficult to ride this out. You know, what are you hearing or seeing anything in terms of the potential casualties within the fitness industry that are likely to come from companies that just don't have the funds to kind of stay closed for this amount of time?
I think there will be casualties. You know, I think our industry is in a way different from restaurants. I mean, I think the biggest casualties will be in retail and in restaurants. Why? Because the restaurant doesn't have a membership system. We have, at least most European countries and most operators have annual contracts. You know, those contracts have put on freeze right now for the largest part. And at least these operators know that the minute they can open the door, they can start activating their direct debits again with their customers, because the contracts are still running and valid, and they have been pushed out for 1 or 2 months or whatever the time is that we will be closed. So that's a very different business scenario than when you have a restaurant and you have no income and you have to wait until you can open your doors again, and then you probably have a capacity constraint that people have to sit 2 meters apart from each other. We have the same constraints maybe in our industry, but at least we have a cash flow running system because of our membership systems. Now, if you have a boutique and you have a pay and play kind of system, then that's a different ballgame. in terms of there was a recent study from paper. Maybe look Piper Sandler in the U.S. in April took a study among consumers and asking them, those who have a health club membership, when the clubs can open again and they can open safely, would you go back to your club? Would you continue your membership? 86% of the people said, yes, I will go back and I will go train and I'll go back to my club. So that's a very encouraging number based on thousands of interviews in various states in the US. I don't know of any research like that has been done in Europe, but I'm certainly it will be done. And my personal feeling is that after having been locked down for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever the time is, and you can go back to your club, go back to see your friends, even though you have to stay 1.5 meters apart, at least you can go back to your club, train on the machines you like, rather than being locked at home and having to use your iPad or your TV or your phone for your exercises, for those who, of course, have used the digital solutions that have been provided by our industry at large. So coming back to your question on the opening and the financial viability, let's say the big companies, and this has been public information, all have gotten more cash. Yeah, either they issued more shares or they got bank loans to cover this period. And I would say most of the larger operators have enough cash to sustain this for 5-6 months or even longer, maybe. I mean, depending on the company. Now, if it's Herman's Fitness Club, and I have been in operation for 30 years, it may not be so bad. I think the casualties will be with the startups, people who took on a franchise a year ago, 2 years ago, who are just maybe getting to break even in their operation. Those will be the people who sadly will be hurt the most, not the people who've been into business for a long time and maybe and probably have, as a result, more meat on the bone than those who've just started the business and were just scrambling to make ends meet. So in China, the number I heard was 3,000 clubs have closed, did not reopen after the lockdown. Now, I think in China there's 40,000 clubs, so that's less than 10%. But in terms of the casualties, yes, there will be. I mean, we all know that in the US, and it's been in the papers, some large companies in the US are talking about bankruptcy proceedings. You know, I'm not telling any secrets here. That has been in the paper. And these are big companies. Now, in terms of will this have bigger impacts? Of course. But at the other end, it sharpens the mind of everybody. It sharpens the creativity of everybody that needs to come out of this crisis stronger. And I'm amazed to see how, in general, just not in fitness, but in also other industries, how people and entrepreneurs have been very creative in finding ways and means to at least continue going and to do things in the lockdown that will make them stronger when they come out of this crisis.
Yeah, I guess when you look at it, and without sort of going into the details of the different businesses, but I suppose in some cases, you know, it's kind of accelerated some of these models and services and that may have been kind of hanging on and may you know just about made sense previously, but I suppose when this comes along, it's enough to tip those vulnerable over the edge is my personal view. I suppose in the same way as if you actually catch COVID and you're in the sort of at-risk category, that's also the area that's is being affected first. So do you see that this is a bit of a kind of an accelerator in terms of business models that are not quite there, or maybe not quite servicing their customers in the same way, and it'll clear some of the sort of weaker ones out from the bottom, do you think?
Absolutely. I think the companies that are talking about maybe bankruptcy proceedings in the US are companies that weren't doing so well already before the COVID crisis occurred. And of course, the situation has been accelerated by this crisis. If from one day, this is an unprecedented event in the world, bar none. I mean, this is the biggest economic crisis. The World Bank just issued their predictions for 2020 and 2021. Well, we're looking in Europe at a 7.5% decline in gross national product. 7.5%. countries will have unemployment into the tune of 15-16%. This is worse than probably at least the financial crisis. We knew where the problem was, right? It was the financial world, it was the banks who overextended themselves with bad loans and bad mortgages. Here, we have a medical crisis, we have an economic crisis, and as a result, a financial crisis, and we have a human tragedy, all happening at the same time. It is really unbelievable, and we will come out of this. I'm an optimist by nature. I believe in the creativity of people. I believe in the creativity of entrepreneurs. We'll get out of this, but it will be a different landscape, totally different landscape. No, not totally. It will be a different landscape once we get out of this, hopefully in a number of months. But for sure, the next 12 to 18 months will be difficult, will continue to be difficult. Everybody talks about possibly a second wave of the COVID in October. We don't speculate on that, but I think for sure all the operators now know that you need to have some fat on the bone. You need to have some cash reserves for a rainy day. And we've been, one of your things you wrote to me before this podcast, the industry has been doing very well for a number of years, but the industry also has been heavily indebted in terms of making this growth possible. With financing means that maybe we're a little bit too stretched, and some of the operators are paying for that now. And if you think that the sky trees will grow into the sky and the sky is the limit, that's not the case. There is always going to be a downtime. Now the good news is, and we have these statistics, particularly on the US market, we've had downtimes. We have statistics for the last 30 years of this industry. Yes, you may have a plateau. Yes, you may have a year that's going down a little bit, but the fundamentals of our industry, people need to exercise. We are part of the healthcare system, and that is not being taken away by this crisis. If anything, it reinforces it. People understand if you're fitter, you have a better immune system, and you're less likely to catch COVID, no matter what your age is. So I think this will, if the industry does a good job in making this even better aware with governments and with the medical community, our sector will get a better place with governments in terms of getting help also and getting out of this crisis as we are experiencing right now.
I think that's an interesting point to talk about. The governments in general, I suppose, from what I've heard, I've spoken to some of the guys recently from EuropeActive, and it seems as though the fitness industry is this kind of poor relative that kind of gets a little bit of lip service every now and again, and but compared to other industries and in terms of prominence of the conversation, it just doesn't seem to be where it needs to be. And I suppose when you look at what's happened, I had an article today that I shared, yesterday and today, in terms of the around about sort of 40% of people that are hospitalized, which means, because of COVID, which means that to be hospitalized, you have to be pretty bad to be, put into hospital. About 50% of those are obese. So it's kind of, the stress on the health service is with people that are generally, lifestyle related illnesses or sicknesses, which I suppose the fitness industry are really primed to be able to help from, health, fitness, nutrition, or that whole area. And yet it seems as though there's this big emphasis on finding the cure and putting, millions and billions into finding cures and vaccines. And yet it doesn't seem to get, the conversation doesn't seem to be about the power in terms of prevention and what that can do to ease all of these issues that we're seeing at the moment, easing pressures on the National Health Service, improving people's quality of life, improving their immune system. So what do you think, in Europe, because I had a similar conversation in the UK, but what do you think from a European perspective? Am I wrong in my assumptions, or do you think there's more that could be done, particularly as it relates to what's happened recently?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. When I was still active as the EuropeActive executive director, I spent a lot of time in Brussels with politicians in the European Parliament as well to preach the gospel of our industry. The problem is that we call it the healthcare budget, but it's really a sick care budget. No matter what country you talk about, Europe or the US, we spend 95% of the healthcare budget on sick people, curing the sick and making the sick hopefully better, and 5% goes to prevention. And that needs to change. And I think in terms of lobbying with the government, EuropeActive is probably the best national association doing that in their particular country. Now, be it they also have a longer history as an association, they also have stronger funding. But I think in quite a few countries, this is happening also on a smaller scale. But in general, we need to do a better job at talking about our industry as part of the healthcare system, and that what we provide is a service, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. And our sector really helps to make people more healthy and prevents them from becoming sick. And obesity is a very difficult one. But in general, we should put in our marketing efforts more emphasis on the holistic approach of our sector, be it sleep management, be it stress relief, be it feeling better, in feeling yourself better because of the exercise that you do in our sector, and that we have the qualified staff to help people to live a healthier and happier life. And I think that element has been not so much been on the radar. And one of the hopes that I have coming out of this crisis is that will become a stronger selling point, if you want, for our industry than it has been before. If you look at advertising for fitness clubs in general around the world, it's about building muscle. And I'm talking black and white now and traditional pictures. It's about building muscle. It's about looking good. And it's not so much about being healthy and preventing disease that we offer as a product and as a service to society. I know that today, Andreas Paulsen, the executive director of EuropeActive, had a meeting with the WHO in Copenhagen to really talk to them as well about our industry. And I think this takes a long time. I know by experience that convincing politicians who usually have a short time horizon, what's my next election date, and not something that is really for the long term. Our industry is there for the long term. And I'm convinced that one of the things you wrote to me is, well, the industry has had phenomenal growth rates. Well, I don't think the industry has that phenomenal growth rates. Some companies may have, but overall, last year, the industry grew, the worldwide numbers that I have, the industry grew by 4%, 4% in number of members. That's not a fantastic growth rate for I believe, looking at the potential we have. In the US, 22% of the people are a member of a health club. That means 78% is not. In Europe, the average percentage of health club membership for 15 years and older is about 8%. 92% are not engaged in our industry as a member. So we have a vast opportunity to really grow the number of members. And I think accelerated growth is possible if we do a number of things right. And these number of things doing right is positioning our industry not just as, it's for sport and it's for building muscle or for looking good. No, it is for general health, and really we are part of the healthcare system and we can help people to lead healthier lives. And I think that message needs to come across much, much more strong, and it should be a holistic approach and not just muscle building.
Why do you think that there's that resistance? As an example today, as I said, I read in the news the British Prime Minister, the reason that he was, several of his colleagues had COVID as well, but the reason he was sick and hospitalized was because he was obese, he was overweight, and he was apparently 10 times more at risk than his colleagues who kind of got through it. So I guess the leader of the United Kingdom was really putting himself in a compromised position, and everybody that was looking up to him at the moment because of something like that. And I guess, why do you think that it's not taken seriously? We all know this, and I'm sure when you look at the way the governments are trying to deal with this, they're getting all the best experts on board in terms of what's happening, and they've got this war room, and then they're trying to sort of decide what's happening. And so you would think something like health, there's enough experts out there and research that know this? Is it because it doesn't fit into their kind of window of re-election and agendas to keep people voting for them? Is that the reason, or what do you think is behind it? Because it makes so much sense, and yeah, it's very difficult to ever get anything to happen. And maybe we shouldn't rely on them, but I think it's because they seem to have so much influence in terms of what goes on and where things are spent and what's supported. You think that there needs to be a little bit more, support there at least.
I think it goes back to behavioral change. We've known since 1965, when the Surgeon General in the US wrote a paper about smoking is bad for you, smoking kills you. How long did it take before the general public accepted that smoking was not good for you? That took about 30 years, and it took legal action to ban smoking from buildings, smoking from public areas, before people started, hey, maybe I should stop smoking. Smoking was in old movies, smoking was the thing, even in airplanes you could smoke, until maybe 15 years ago. Now, so that's one example of behavioral change. Brushing your teeth is also a behavioral thing. In the Western world, everybody knows that you need to brush your teeth at least twice a day, best 3 times a day, to prevent your teeth from rotting out of your mouth. In terms of obesity, or in terms of not having a healthy lifestyle and not having enough exercise, that is even more difficult, because you can't take a pill. You have to get out of bed, you have to go jogging, you have to go to the gym, you have to do a certain number of things, and then control your food, because losing weight or preventing obesity has to do with the mind, it has to do with the body as well. It has to do with the way you eat, the 3 M's: the mind, the mouth, and the muscle. The most difficult part is the mind. If Dr. Pamela Peeke is an interesting lady in the US who, I don't know whether she's still on TV, but she used to be on TV when I was there. She talks about changing behavior of any person, no matter what it is: stopping smoking, not drinking too much, or losing weight, or being more healthy. It's about the mind, it's about the mouth, and it's about the muscle. Now, the muscle, the exercise, according to her, is 20%. 30% is the nutrition component, and 50% is the mind. Now, changing people to understand that are not, Matthew, you are a fitness buff. You like to train, you do it every day, and you would die the day you could not train at all. But you're maybe a few percent of the population that are like that, who are intrinsically motivated. Many people don't like to sweat, they don't like to exercise. And our industry has not cracked the nut yet in getting those people who don't like to exercise, to get them into our camp, and to make it fun for them to be engaged with our industry. And I think that's where the golden nugget is, and the $1 trillion question: how do we get people to get fun in exercising? Because, I read all these things about Peloton being successful. I bet you many of the Peloton people already are a member of a health club. I think this that at least 60-70% of the people who buy a Peloton already are a member of a health club. So these are, you're preaching to the converted. We need to find a way to preach to, let's say, the 80% of the people who are not engaged in our sector. How can we make them, how can we make our industry more appealing to them so they come and join? Mm-hmm. And it is difficult. Just as it is difficult if you like to smoke and you have that habit, to kick that habit of smoking. See how many people fail at quitting smoking, or if you drink too much, to quit that. It's about behavioral change, and it takes psychology. It takes a lot of things to make a person change their habits. Mm. And that is our industry. If you say, what industry are we in? I think we should be part in the behavioral change industry, helping people to live better lives. But that's a very different approach than just putting in a bunch of machines in a room and say, here, you can come and train. If you do that, you get those people in, like 20 years ago, you get the 10% of the people who are intrinsically motivated to train, who like sports and who come and do that out of their own motivation. You don't have to explain to them anything. We're now in a different phase of our sector to broaden, and that's where digitalization comes in. That's where psychology comes in. That's where a lot of the new, let's say, techniques of helping people to change their behavior are going to be very interesting in the next phase of fitness 3.0 or 4.0, no matter how you want to phrase it, after this COVID crisis. And one of the things that I think is the benefit of this period of quietness and people sitting at home, you can think about what you're going to do different when you come out of this crisis. And I know there's a lot of things. Today somebody said, I think it was Nerio, who said, what normally would have taken 5 months, we now do in 5 weeks. Yeah, because we're all locked together, we're all very focused in solving a certain problem. Everybody is on board and everybody is helping to solve that particular problem in a much faster way than if we would not have been locked down in our own home offices as opposed to being in the office altogether. So that's an interesting perspective. There will be winners out of this and there will be losers out of this. But our industry will, I'm convinced, will come out of this stronger, and the brightest minds will come up with new ideas in engaging the customer that we already have much stronger and fight this whole one of the what I call the 6 inconvenient truths of our sector. One of the big inconvenient truths, of course, is the retention or the lack thereof in our sector, and we need to find ways and means to do that. And I think technology and digitalization really can help in that area in a big way.
So just to close off that sort of government question, then, as you know, in terms of your position or with EuropeActive, then do you think that that's just something that you have to accept, that it's a slow, long process, and the ability to really kind of influence government to take things more seriously is a battle probably not worth getting involved in, would you say? Or is it, do you think there's a kind of gap in, an opening in the door to probably, get behind and open it a little bit more?
No, I definitely think we shouldn't forget about it. We shouldn't lean back and say, well, it's taking too long and they're not listening. No, I think right now is a very good moment to do that. In terms of presenting our sector in a way as a very professional organization. By the way, one of the things, and that's why we started 10 years ago with EREPS, and the UK has been very successful with REPS UK, that is to have a certification and a register for exercise professionals. That will, by having that, you show that you're taking your profession serious. Accountants have a register, nurses have a register, doctors, dentists, all professions that are architects. We did not have a register for our sector. Now we have, and we've had it now for a number of years, but not enough people are yet, let's say, embracing that and understanding that it's very, very important to have that professional recognition for our sector to be taken serious by government and by the medical profession. And not every club will want to be engaged in a medical connotation, but that's okay. Our sector has an ecosystem that is very wide and very broad. And if somebody wants to focus just on bodybuilding, that's great. Just focus that your club is a bodybuilding club. That's great. Fine. But if you want to if you take Nuffield in the UK as a brilliant example, Nuffield is taking a very clear linkage with the healthcare system, and they have physiotherapists in the club, and they are doing all sort of things to position themselves like that. And I think in other countries that is not yet happening as it is happening in the UK, but it will. And I think as coming out of this crisis, the whole segmentation of our sector, taking a different positioning vis-a-vis what kind of customers do you want to get into your club, and how do you want to connect with the healthcare system. Every company and every club needs to decide it for themselves. But there is a huge opportunity, but not for everybody. But those who want to say, yeah, that's my point of differentiation, they definitely should do that. And I guarantee you that the more this whole health positioning of our sector takes hold, governments will listen to us, and doctors will listen to us, and they will, instead of prescribing a pill, they'll say, okay, Herman, go and exercise a little bit more, adjust your eating, and go to this club that I know is good, and they will take good care of you, and they'll help you to change your lifestyle and to get in better shape.
I think that's a really interesting point that you make there, really, in terms of the identity. I suppose if you go back and track the industry, and this story has been told many times, but you come from the Jane Fonda and the Arnold Schwarzenegger days, and that kind of, that's sort of where a lot of these fitness concepts have started. And I suppose now with a lot of the research that's coming out, and you realize the benefits, the benefits psychologically, physically, of exercise, moving, breathing, etc., has really, I guess, changed the industry. And I suppose in some respects, there's a bit of an identity issue where probably the industry hasn't been taken seriously because of some of those. It's about both biceps and bums and that's it. But I guess now when you look at some of the information that's coming out, there's some genuine solid research that we can build upon. And I guess when I was at the EuropeActive event early this year, where they were talking about where the opportunities are for the industry, because as you say, we're all going after this, a lot of people are going after a similar audience with similar messaging. And I suppose there's this big 80% or whatever it is out there that probably want a slightly different message and need fitness for a very, very different reason, more on the health side, which I suppose is a great opportunity for the industry. So in your views then, how do you think the industry would go about that, adjusting their identity to take some of those opportunities?
I think we can partner. We can partner with certain companies. And one of the things that people are asking is, what is the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts of this world and the Facebooks? How are they going to impact our sector? Well, first of all, we knew that Google has purchased, or not Google, Alphabet, but that's, Google is their biggest brand, have purchased Fitbit for $1.2 billion earlier this year. Why have they done that? They obviously have an agenda to get into the healthcare sector, and they know that wearables are very important for that, and that connects them to our sector. Secondly, Tim Cook just recently said that the biggest contribution that we as a company can make to the wealth of the world is to get engaged in the healthcare sector and to make health a personalized thing and to help people to live healthier lives. They started 5 years ago with the Apple Watch. They had a long-term vision, not just to bring out a wearable so you can have some fun watch faces on that watch. No, the connection has been from the beginning to connect with healthcare and with fitness. And that Apple has made some connections in the US with fitness chains. They've made some connections in Europe with some fitness chains. They've made connections with equipment suppliers to connect with the Apple Watch. People can now gain points by having their circles made round for a number of months in a row, and they get benefits in the club or outside of the club. That is where I think we need to look for. They have the big bucks. Apple has earmarked $500 million just to get into this sphere. Google has just made a $1.2 billion investment in buying Fitbit. They're not going to stop there. They have, I think, what is it? Google has $120 billion in cash on their balance sheet right now as we speak. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to look at areas where they can get engaged, and that's why of the 5 top tech companies, I think Google and Apple are the 2 that are most interested in our sector and are really going to play a role in our sector. Apple is talking to manufacturers of hardware. Apple is talking to fitness operators. Of course, Apple is very proprietary, but if we work smart with those kind of companies, they can help us to make the pie bigger. And they can help us to get those consumers of the 80% that are not yet engaged in the US and the 90% that are not engaged in Europe to get maybe a little bit more self-motivated to start exercising more and to use the fitness club and the fitness product that that we are selling and the services that we offer to help them in making those behavioral changes.
Yeah, I guess in some ways, when you listen to those numbers that you've been talking about, it's the opportunity is vast. It seems as though we're very fortunate to be in this industry that we're in, because that's it seems to be where everybody's focusing on. I guess it's probably more of a case of when we start thinking about what will the world look like afterwards. I suppose it's thinking about how you play in that space, or adapt your business to be part of it. Are there any things, you work and rub shoulders with a lot of the sort of very successful people operators in that space. What are some of the clever things or smart moves that you're seeing people make to I suppose, to kind of evolve what's a traditional bricks and mortar fitness business where you rent out equipment to sort of, having more of a longer term view? Is there any things that you're seeing out there that are worth, kind of sharing with the listeners?
Oh, that's a very, very broad question. Let me first say, you mentioned something about evolution. I'm a big fan of Darwin, and as almost everybody knows, but I'd like to repeat it here, that Darwin said it's not the strongest nor the most intelligent of species that survives, but it's the one that's most adaptable to change. Now, on that note, I think I'll give you a couple of examples of companies that I know in the fitness industry that have exactly done that. When René Moos with Health City was one of the largest operators in Europe, with 250 clubs in Europe, he discovered quickly that maybe long-term, the mid-market was not the place that he wanted to play, and that maybe, looking at the future, he should have a different business model. So he take the very courageous move to decide that he was going to change his business model, going away from where he was in the higher to mid-market with Health City, to be a low-cost operator. He bought a small company called Basic Fit in Holland. They had 30 clubs. He bought that. In the beginning, run Basic Fit and Health City next to each other, but then quickly decided that was not going to be successful. So he totally flip-flopped the whole Health City scene to Basic Fit, and the rest is history. So that is what I mean with Darwinism. He understood that he had to change in order to survive, and he was smart enough and had the wisdom to see that in time. Because here too, timing is everything. You need to do those things timely, and then be able to be brave and courageous, and even mortgage your house and your wife's jewelry in order to do that financially. So that's one example. I think if you look at some of the hardware companies on the supply side, some, I won't mention any names, but you probably know that who I'm referring to, have been very successful in transforming themselves from just a supplier of treadmills or bikes or cross trainers to really a company that is offering a holistic approach with a web connection, with a very, very good support system for club operators to be more successful, in addition to buying hardware from those particular companies. So to have a more of a holistic approach, and not just throwing some treadmills over the fence and tell your customer, God bless you, and be happy with those products, but helping them as a partner to be successful. So those are some of the things that are happening and have happened. Similarly, if you look at companies that have not done that, they're no longer there today. They have vanished from the earth. They no longer exist. They were too late in making that change and going away from what they knew best. And I mentioned Bally's Total Fitness. When I came to the US in 1998, Bally's Total Fitness was one of the largest fitness clubs in the United States, 6 million members, and I think with 600 clubs. Today, the brand does no longer exist, and the company, they've sold their clubs to other operators who still are there today, but that company did not survive because, again, they did not change with the time, and they were not willing to change and be adaptable to the new market conditions and the new consumers. Mm. So there is one day I have time, I'll write a book about those experiences. Also, and I don't want too many brand names here because I'm sitting here with my neutral hat on as EuropeActive ambassador. But there is quite a few examples that Jan and I have written a book, by the way, which is called the Horizon 2030, which we were going to publish and issue on the EHFF, which Matthew, you've been to, I think, most of our events. That book is gathering dust right now in Jan's warehouse, but we will, on September 30, when the EHFF hopefully will take place, that book will be distributed to all the participants. And there is some thinking in there that is phenomenal. And it's about what is the next 10 years going to look like. You know, so we've have some brilliant minds from the industry contributing to this book. We had 16 people writing in this book about how will the next 10 years be. I've made in that book some predictions. Look back 10 years, you know. Funny thing, if you look back 10 years and today's 2019 top 10 companies, or top 20 companies in Europe, of the top 20 of 10 years ago, today 8 do no longer exist. That's only 10 years. Now, fast forward 10 years from now, and forget about COVID, you know, that is, of course, an event that nobody has been able to predict. But if you look at 10 years from now and think about it, which companies will still be there? Both on the supplier side, as well as on the operator side. That is a very interesting question. And again, I go back to Darwin. Those who are adaptable to change will still be there. And I think that's one thing that COVID will force everybody to do, is make sure you've got some cash in the bank for a rainy day. I think that is a lesson that this COVID time has learned for all people in all businesses, no matter fitness or restaurants or any other business. You need to have some pot of money sitting on the side just in case. You know, you need to do that for your private household finances. You know, just in case the washing machine breaks down, do I have enough money to buy a new washing machine? Well, we need to do that in business also. And maybe some of the companies that are in trouble right now haven't done that enough in terms of preserving some cash for the rainy day. And we're having more than a rainy day right now. We're having a rainy couple of months. But again, the smart business people will survive this and will come out of this stronger. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, it's really been a kind of attitude of highly leveraging everything you can, as opposed to conserving it. It's like, okay, well, if you've got something, then sort of use that to borrow more. And certainly some of the stories I hear, you know, you're sort of building businesses on potential that's likely to happen way down the road. You know, they're borrowing money on some of those future earnings that are so far down the road that it's very difficult to predict. And I suppose now some of those decisions are coming home to roost, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I think on that note, money was so cheap, you know, the last couple of years. You know, you were stupid not to borrow money because banks were almost coming. Please take my money. You know, you have a growth company. You're in it. We still are a sexy industry. You know, there's a recent report from McKinsey on what kind of industries will rebound quickly. Our industry is mentioned as one that will rebound quickly. Why? Because the fundamentals of our industry, of the growth we've had in the last 20 years, are no different. You know, I would say, on the contrary, the fundamentals for our industry have been strengthened because of this crisis. People understand you need to be healthy. When you're fit, you have a better immune system. And these pandemics will not go away. Bill Gates is spending billions of dollars right now, and I really applaud the man for doing this. He is a visionary. In 2015, he gave a speech and predicting there would be a pandemic in the near future. Well, unfortunately, he's been right. And he says, if we would have spent a couple of $1 billion on really researching a vaccine that will take care of this corona type of viruses, we would not have had this crisis today. And he's now, as he's invested a lot of money on the Ebola. You know, Ebola was a big problem. And because of research, they found a vaccine and a medicine for Ebola. The same thing is happening now. Well, will it take 12 months? Will it take less? Will it take longer to find this vaccine and this medicine for COVID-19? We don't know. But for sure, we need to step up the investment in finding a cure for this. So we will not end up again in this pandemic in the near future.
So let's talk about digital. Like you mentioned it earlier, and one of the things that people you're seeing a lot of businesses now thinking about, okay, well, let's find a solution for people at home. You mentioned earlier about the the Basic Fit. What was that, like one of the biggest home workouts that they've done recently? What's your thoughts on that? Because I guess for a lot of companies, it's a real shift from their standard business model, and in terms of the production, the distribution, just if that's not the business that you're in, it's quite a difficult thing to do successfully. And I guess people kind of almost assume that that's what they've got to be doing if they're a bricks and mortar business. So where do you sit on that? Is it something that you think if you've got it within your DNA that are able to kind of add that as part of your offering, you should do it, but if not, you should be cautious? Or tell us a little bit about what some of the success stories you've seen and what you think about that for general companies.
Yeah. In 2017, Basic Fit decided to get into the digital sphere by building a studio close to Amsterdam to have their own studio, their own recording. This was with Endemol quality kind of camera systems, stage, the whole 9 yards. A lot of money was invested in developing Basic Fit's own production capability, hiring staff, hiring experts, involving the best minds around the world in terms of doing video as well as doing exercise. And today, Basic Fit is probably the best positioned as a sort of a holistic company, multi-channel company that has clubs, brick and mortar clubs in 5 countries, and 829 or so clubs open one day again, closed today. And that has been an investment, and again, a bold decision by the management in order to make that investment. Others have bought from third party, let's say, digital solutions, but it is not easy. It is very costly, and it is not easy. Now, you can only do that if you have the scale that a Basic Fit, a McFit, maybe Planet Fitness, a few big companies can only do that. There is very good off-the-shelf solutions that you can buy, and I won't mention any names because I don't want to offend anybody, but there are very good solutions you can buy off the shelf and offer that white label with your club, whether you're a small club or a chain, doesn't matter. My personal opinion is, and I'm not a millennial, but I think that fitness is a social. We should not underestimate the social element of our product and of our service. People come to the club to meet friends, to meet the staff, to be away from home. And doing fitness at home is fine now. We're all locked in our rooms, and it's great to have your iPad or your TV, and you can do some exercise at home, but without equipment in most cases. That's fine. Once the clubs are open again, will the video and the digital fitness be as successful as it is today? More importantly, is it a business model that operators can make money from? Because right now, most of the digital offerings are free. People don't pay for it. In the future, and Basic Fit used to charge for the digital offering, I think it's around €5 a month to have that option. I think that the industry needs to rethink this whole. People who buy a Peloton pay, what is it, $29 a month, to have the subscription for the online exercise. So it needs to be a business model that is sustainable. It is not easy to do if you want to do it yourself. That's number one. And number two, if you buy it off the shelf, you need to make sure that it's really fit for your purpose and fit for your brand that you want to offer to your customers. In terms of the ecosystem of our industry, digital is here to stay. I'm convinced that it will be not going away. We need to figure out, and many operators need to figure out, how to make money with it and how to differentiate themselves from the competition with it. Will the customer stop going to the club now they've had this experience of doing exercise at home? I don't believe so. Also, that question was asked in the research that I mentioned earlier from Piper Sandler, is definitely proving that the people will continue to use it, but they'll go back to the club. So I think it's a complementary thing. It does not replace going to the gym, because in the gym, you have all the equipment at your disposal. A lot of machines, a lot of different exercise. You have the variety. When you do it at home, usually it's without the machines, unless you buy an expensive bike or a treadmill. But most people, particularly in Europe, don't have the size of homes to be able to put in a big exercise machine. So it's usually down to dumbbells and some simple things rather than really the machines and the choice of machines you have in the club. In addition to the club having the benefit of being the social place and the place where you meet your friends, where you have the group exercise with your friends together, which is a big benefit for the brick and mortar clubs, and the digital is a complement to that, in my humble opinion.
So I think the lesson really, and I kind of agree with you. I've been watching how it's unfolding, and I think the lesson is, probably be cautious, because you can easily sink a lot of money into something. And I suppose at a time where most businesses are quite vulnerable from a cash perspective, it's just, kind of maybe not necessarily just reacting because that's what everybody else is doing, is, to think through the strategy carefully. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, can you make money with it? Is it a worthwhile business model? The investment you make in it, are you going to get it back? And of course, people are now used during this lockdown period to get it for free. Are you able to charge for it once the lockdown is over? That is for many operators now, because a lot of personal trainers have done simply with their mobile phone. They've done things, they've posted things. You go on Facebook and Instagram, there's a lot of offerings. There is a zillion options that you can take for free to have these exercises. Are they good exercises? Are they motivating? Are they long-term? God knows. For sure, as an operator, and as a bigger operator, as a chain operator, you need to have a very, very clear business model behind it to make it fun for your customers and for your members, as well as a profitable business proposition for your shareholders.
Yeah. Great point there. So as we just sort of wrap up, I'd like to, just spend a moment talking about the sort of supply side. It's something that you've been very involved with in your career and have a good knowledge of. And with your relationships with FIBO now, I'm just interested in your thoughts in terms of the landscape there. What do you see is likely to happen? Do you think we're going to see a lot of consolidation? Do you think there's going to be people dropping out of the business? What's your views on that? And I'm not asking you to name any names or to say anything you shouldn't do, but just a general view of the supply side, particularly with FIBO coming up in October. And are we going to see a real slim down? Are we going to see a different type of show and event where people are not going to be spending as much money on booths? What does that space look like in your view?
You're right. There's three questions in one. You're asking about trade shows, you're asking about the supply side and the consolidation there, and you're asking about, how will FIBO be in October? Well, let me first answer the question about the trade shows in general. I think if you look at when I was in the tennis business about 30 years ago, long time ago, there was ISPO, right? And ISPO is it's in Munich, and it's a huge sporting goods show where Adidas, Nike, all the big brands are there. And then 30 years ago, we questioned in Prince, should we really go to the trade show? Should we spend the money to go to this, to Munich, travel, blah, blah, all the cost? And we said, well, probably trade shows are not going to last for very long. Well, here we are today, 30 years later, and ISPO is thriving, doing very well, thank you very much, because people want to meet people. People want to shake hands. And I think FIBO will, as the biggest trade show in the world, will survive, will be there. Will this year be difficult? Of course, this year will be difficult. But this is a company that's in there for the long term. And the good news of our products, if you want to try a treadmill, do that online. Try to do that online. You can't. Try to have a trade show virtual. You can do that for meeting certain ideas and showing a video of a new product. But in our industry, particularly for the equipment side, it's still, you want to kick the tires. You want to try how this new cross trainer feels, how this new machine feels, how this new circuit feels. So I can see for the hardware side, particularly of our industry, that trade shows are here to stay. But there will be fewer of them. I think the small trade shows will have a tough time sustaining their position. There will be consolidation. There may be a regionalization as well. I don't know whether in the next 18 months people will travel as much as they used to until 6 weeks ago. when everything collapsed. That will take a long time for a lot of travel to kick back up. But within, let's say, within regions, the trade shows will definitely survive and will be there for the future, because of the dynamics of our industry, showing product and testing product, and at the second time, for the social element, for people to be together, rub shoulders, shake hands, and have a good time, and once a year a party with your friends from the industry. So that's your number one question on trade shows in general. Second one, in terms of the supply side, I've been following, of course, the supply side for quite a few years, and today, if you take the 5 top companies, and I'm talking about equipment or hardware equipment for the fitness industry, the consolidation is tremendous. 80% of all the equipment is sold today by 5 brands, and that percentage has only gone up. And by the way, you see the same on the operator side. The consolidation of the chains becoming bigger and the brands becoming fewer is also happening. Is that a good thing? Time will tell. I mean, in terms, the customer in the end will decide. Does that mean that smaller equipment suppliers have no place? Of course they have. This 20% is still a lot of billions of euros in terms of equipment that can be sold. And there will be specializations. Most of the big brands now sell everything. They sell cardio equipment, they sell software, they sell strength equipment. But there's other companies that are specializing in a niche and do a certain thing and do that very well, and can very well survive in doing that. So I can see innovation taking place for the near future on the supply side. But yes, consolidation will take place, as it does on the operator side and the supply side. Now, as far as the FIBO is concerned for this year, it's October 1 to 4 in Cologne. September 30 is the European Health and Fitness Forum. I spoke today with Silke Frank from FIBO. They are absolutely convinced that will take place. Nobody knows, but they're preparing for it. They're planning for it. It will take place. It will be a little bit smaller FIBO than the normal one in April, but it will definitely take place. And I think a lot of people, having been locked down for months, will die to have a good beer in Cologne with their friends and celebrate that we've come out of this crisis. Hopefully, by the time that the end of September with the HFF and FIBO and the beginning of October. So that's my 5 cents.
Yeah. So and with, like, I've been to FIBO for many years. It's an important date on my calendar. A lot of my business jumps have happened as a result of that show. But it's also, I think over 100,000 people go through the doors, and I've tried to move around that event, and it's quite difficult. So how do you think they're going to deal with the social distancing? Surely that's going to make it quite a challenge to do what people expect from FIBO.
Very good question. It may be, but I don't know. The decision hasn't been made. It could be that it will be only business to business, that it will not be a consumer show. So it's just business to business, and then it's much easier to control the crowds, because then the crowd, on a Thursday and a Friday, is very manageable. So that's and the FIBO management, of course, will not organize anything that will not guarantee safety for the visitors as well as the safety for the exhibitors, and aligning with the German health authorities in terms of how these things are allowed to organize. Of course, the physical distancing of 1.5 meters will be there, I'm sure, in beginning of October. That we may all have to wear these masks. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can guarantee you that FIBO will not do anything that is not safe or is going to endanger anybody's health, as they did very timely in canceling the April show. They were very early in making that decision, seeing how the lay of the land was. But it could very well be that it's a different FIBO in October, where it's only business to business and no consumer show at all. But I don't know that. But that could be, to answer your question, that could be the decision that will be made for that particular reason of crowd control and safety.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So just as we wrap up then, Herman, I guess, as we've covered a lot of ground here, really, a lot more than I thought would squeeze into this sort of hour or so interview. But I suppose just sort of parting thoughts, really. There's with there still being a huge amount of uncertainty in terms of when businesses are back to normal and what the world will look like when it opens and how gyms can operate with physical distancing and all that. If there was a few things that you would sort of, parting words for people to sort of focus on or to think about in terms of, both on the supplier and the operator side, in terms of, as we come towards the end of a year, is there anything else that you think is as an industry that we should be looking at, thinking about, exploring, or not that is worth sharing as we wrap things up?
Yeah. Oh, very, very good question. I think what has surprised me in the last 6 to 8 weeks is how much people have come together to talk with each other, to think about how do we get out of this crisis more so than I've ever seen before. So the camaraderie, we're in this all together. Nobody had a playbook how to solve this problem. This is new to everybody. No matter how long you've been in the industry, like me, 25 years, and you probably a little shorter, but nobody has ever experienced this before. So it was new ground to cover for everybody. That's one thing. And I think a lot of people got together within countries, but also on an international level, that maybe never talked to each other before. And this is not, these maybe were competitors or people who normally wouldn't really consider even sharing some ideas with each other, but they have gotten together and shared the problems they have and how do we get out of this for the common good. I think it's strengthened also the position of the national associations and the position of EuropeActive in helping to share knowledge and to share best practices. And, this country is doing this country is doing that, sharing information with each other in terms of getting better information. And by the way, in this crisis, I've said it very often, we have to take 100% of the decisions with only 50% of the information. That is a learning that we all have from this crisis. You have to take decisions not having all the information, but you hope that you're going to take you have the right instinct and the right people you're talking to and listening to, and what is the best thing to do here. Now, coming out of this, your question is, what are some of my advice? First of all, do the right things for the long term. If you think you need to do something to save your company for the next couple of months, don't do it. Then it's better to stop doing the business because you don't have a longer term viability. So number one, do things now that are good for the long term. If you think there is no long term, then get out of the business. Number two, embrace your people. I think if for what I've heard today also, and if you haven't heard the webinar that we had today with Renee Mose, Humphrey Cobbold, Nerio Alessandri, and Gabriel Sayers, I asked the question to them, what is the one thing that personally has impressed you and has really surprised you and was an eye-opener in this crisis? And all four of them said how my teams have pulled together and really have done everything possible to do the right thing in this difficult time. So I've always been a very big people person, in terms of understanding that with the right people, you get the right results. And those people who now say, I'm paying my people even though I'm not getting my money in, but I'm helping my people to get through this difficult period, those are the entrepreneurs and the business people that will have a loyal team coming out of this crisis. So so first of all, do things now for the long term, not just for the short term. Take care of your people. And thirdly, rethink your business model. This is a time to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, the world has changed. We're coming out of this. What do I have to do different, and how I can sharpen my pencil to really adapt and adopt my business model coming out of this situation. Those would be my three pointers. Maybe the fourth one, when in doubt, don't open yet. Be careful when you reopen. be careful not to destroy your image, and be sure that when you open, you have dotted every I and crossed every T in order to make sure that you are as safe and for your employees as well as for your members in reopening your clubs. So those would be my 4 sort of pointers. Not having thought too long about it, because you didn't tell me you're going to ask this question before.
I've totally put you on the spot there.
Yes.
But that's always when the best stuff comes out anyway. No, well, Herman, look, it's been a really interesting interview. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm hoping that people that are listening will have the opportunity to sort of, think through some of those things. As you say, we're all going through unknown times. There's no playbook. It seems as though the playing field's been leveled. Everybody's in the same place, which I guess in some ways is an exciting opportunity when you have got the ability to really be innovative and do something a little bit different, and also scary at the same time. So I think a lot of the things you've said there are really good ideas to spend some time thinking through. So thanks again for giving us the time and sharing your ideas and knowledge with us. And I hope that I will be able to see you in Germany at some point for a big beer around the bar, and that we can actually shake hands.
Well, I'm not sure the shaking hands will then be allowed yet on September 30, but at least we can do a namaste to each other. Thank you very much, Matthew, for giving me the time to share these thoughts with you and your viewers and your listeners. Let's put it this way. I give it a very high probability that we will see each other on September 30 in Cologne. I'm an optimist. The glass is always half full.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thanks again, Herman. And be safe.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.